Cowboys Nation, this changes everything. A massive move just shook up Dallas, and you need to hear this right now. The front office just made a splash signing that has the entire NFL world talking, and it's going to reshape this defense in ways you might not even realize yet. Make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and smash those notifications because we're bringing you daily Cowboys updates you cannot afford to miss. We're on the road to 252,000 subscribers, and we need you on this journey with us. Now let's dive into the bombshell news that just dropped. Von Miller is officially a Dallas Cowboy. Yes, you heard that right. The future Hall of Famer, the Super Bowl champion, the legend who has terrorized quarterbacks for over a decade in this league, is now wearing the star. This isn't a drill. This isn't a rumor. This is happening right now, and the implications for this team are absolutely massive. The contract details just came out, and we need to break down exactly what this means for America's team moving forward. Von Miller has signed a one-year deal worth $5.5 million, with incentives that could push it all the way up to $7.5 million. Now, before you start panicking about cap space and money, let me explain why this is actually a brilliant move by the front office. Those incentives that bump the deal up to $7.5 million are classified as not likely to be earned, which means they don't count against the salary cap right now. We're talking about things like 10 sacks in a season, or maybe 8 sacks plus a playoff appearance, or even a Super Bowl run. Those are the kinds of benchmarks that would trigger the extra money. And while Von Miller is absolutely capable of hitting those numbers, the NFL's accounting rules mean Dallas gets to keep their cap situation clean in the meantime. The guaranteed money is likely right around that $5.5 million mark, maybe with about $1 million in per game active bonuses sprinkled in. This is a low-risk, high-reward type of signing that could absolutely transform this pass rush, at a time when the Cowboys desperately needed some veteran presence and proven production off the edge. Think about what Von Miller brings to this roster, beyond just the stats. This is a player who has been to multiple Pro Bowls, won a Super Bowl MVP, and has been one of the most feared pass rushers in football for his entire career. Even at this stage, even after everything he's been through, Von Miller understands how to get after the quarterback. He knows every trick in the book. He's seen every blocking scheme, every protection adjustment, every slide and chip block that offensive coordinators can throw at him. And now he's going to be teaching all of that knowledge to the younger guys in the Dallas locker room. Micah Parsons is already a generational talent, but imagine what he's going to learn from working alongside Von Miller every single day in practice. Imagine the stunts they can run together. Imagine the confusion they can create for opposing offensive lines, who now have to account for 2 elite pass rushers coming from different angles. This changes the entire calculus for how teams have to prepare for the Cowboys' defense. But let's talk about what this signing cost the team in terms of roster moves, because nothing comes free in the NFL. To make room for Von Miller on the 53-man roster, the Dallas Cowboys had to make a cut, and it's a name that a lot of fans had grown attached to over the past year. Traeshon Holden has been released. Now, I know there are going to be some of you out there who are upset about this. Holden had developed a bit of a cult following among certain sections of Cowboys Nation. People loved his energy, his effort, the way he attacked special teams opportunities. But we need to have an honest conversation about where he actually stood on this roster, and why this move, while maybe disappointing to some, makes complete sense when you look at the bigger picture. Let's start with the most obvious thing that happened in the preseason game that sealed Holden's fate. That fumble on the punt return was an absolute disaster. Now, I don't want to pile on the guy because football is a tough game and mistakes happen, but we have to be real about what that play showed. It wasn't just that he fumbled, it's that he made a decision to even field that punt in the first place when he probably shouldn't have. And then, as if that wasn't enough of a red flag, there was another punt earlier in the game that got called back due to a penalty, where Holden also made a questionable decision to go get the ball. He essentially doubled down on a mistake, showing a pattern of decision-making that just doesn't fly when you're fighting for the back end of an NFL roster. Special teams is all about discipline and making smart choices in high-pressure situations, and Holden showed he wasn't quite there yet. But here's the thing that I think a lot of people are missing in all the emotional reactions to this cut. Traeshon Holden had already fallen way down the wide receiver depth chart. If you were paying close attention to the preseason game, he didn't even see the field until the third quarter. Meanwhile, guys like Camden Brown and Anthony Smith were getting opportunities ahead of him. That tells you everything you need to know about where the coaching staff valued him in the pecking order. And here's something else that might surprise some of you. According to everything I've heard and the way things played out last year, Holden was never really that close to making the 53-man roster in the first place. I know that doesn't match the narrative that some fans had built up in their heads, but the reality inside the organization was that the coaching staff and front office just didn't view him at the same level that some of us on the outside did. Sometimes there's a disconnect between fan perception and what the people who are actually evaluating these players every single day in practice are seeing. Now, one important thing to note about cutting Holden now rather than later is that it almost certainly means he's not going to end up on the Dallas practice squad. If they wanted him as a practice squad option, they would have kept him through more of the preseason and then tried to sneak him through waivers. By cutting him at this point, there's actually a decent chance he gets claimed by another team during the waiver process, because we're still at the 90-man roster phase, where teams are more willing to take flyers on guys. So for those of you who are hoping Holden might stick around in the practice squad, that's probably not going to happen. His time as a member of the Dallas Cowboys organization has come to an end, and now the team moves forward with Von Miller taking his roster spot. Let me ask you this, Cowboys Nation. How do you grade the Von Miller signing? Are we talking an A-plus home run move that could push this team over the top? Is it a solid B, a good veteran addition that fills a need? Is it a C, just kind of average and not moving the needle much? Or are you lower on it than that? Drop your grade in the comments right now. I want to see if Cowboys fans are as hyped about this as I think they should be, or if there are concerns I'm not thinking about. Now let's shift gears and talk about some other major takeaways from the preseason game that we need to address, because there were some real warning signs flashing that could impact this team's championship aspirations if they don't get cleaned up before week 1 of the regular season. The biggest concern I have coming out of that game is the offensive line, specifically the depth behind the starting 5. We all know that Tyler Smith, Tyler Biadasz, Zach Martin, and Terrence Steele are locked in as starters. TJ Bass is your top backup interior guy. Those 6 players are absolutely set in stone. But when you start looking at who the 7th, 8th, and potentially 9th offensive linemen are going to be on this roster, things get murky real fast, and that should terrify every Cowboys fan who remembers what happened when this team lost offensive linemen to injury in previous seasons. Watching the game live, my immediate reaction was that the run blocking from the backup offensive lineman was not good enough, not even close. And after going back and rewatching the All-22 film, that concern only grew stronger. Trevor Keegan got a lot of work at left guard, and he struggled. Johnny Cornelius, or Johnny Cornelius as some call him, got work at right guard and had his issues too. Matt Lever was running with the 3rd string as the center. These guys are competing for those final offensive line roster spots, and right now, I'm not seeing enough to feel confident if any of them had to step into a real game and play meaningful snaps. Your top 6 offensive linemen are clearly established, but spots 7, 8, and 9 are completely wide open, and I genuinely would not be surprised if the Cowboys end up bringing in someone from outside the organization to fill one of those spots. The problem is that finding quality offensive line depth on the street is incredibly difficult. The last time Dallas really tried to make a move like that was when they traded for Travarius Ward. Excuse me, I'm thinking of when they traded Parker Ahinger for, you know what? These trades blur together, but the point is that acquiring offensive linemen from other teams' rosters is a crapshoot, and often doesn't work out the way you hope. So the Cowboys might be stuck trying to develop what they have, and that's a scary proposition right now, based on what we saw in the preseason. Let me get into some specific numbers because this is where it gets really concerning. Drew Shelton allowed 3 pressures in his limited action. 3 pressures. Marcellus Johnson allowed 1 pressure but also committed 3 penalties. 3 penalties in 1 preseason game is absolutely unacceptable. There had been some positive buzz coming out of training camp about Johnson potentially pushing for a roster spot, but that performance was a massive step backward. Trevor Keegan allowed 1 pressure. Johnny Cornelius allowed 1 pressure. Most of the pressure allowed was coming from the tackle positions with Shelton and Johnson on the outside, which is especially worrying because tackle is the hardest position to find quality depth at. Nate Thomas is a name I want to focus on for a second because his performance really concerned me. Even though he didn't technically allow a pressure according to the stat sheet, when you watch the tape it felt like he was just barely surviving out there. He was on the edge of getting beat on multiple reps. Now, if this was against starting caliber edge rushers, I could give him a pass and say, okay, he's a backup going against starters, that's tough. But this was against backup edge rushers. If you're barely surviving against other teams' backups, what's going to happen when you actually have to play real snaps against legitimate starting defensive ends in a game that matters? That's the question that keeps me up at night when I think about the Cowboys' offensive line depth. The interior offensive line backups were actually decent in pass protection, all things considered. I can live with Trevor Keegan or a Johnny Cornelius being your 4th or 5th interior offensive lineman. If one of them has to come in and play guard for a few snaps due to injury, I don't think the offense completely falls apart. But the tackles, man, the tackles are a serious problem. If Drew Shelton has to play significant snaps right now, without massive amounts of help from tight ends and running backs in protection, I think this offense is in trouble. And here's the thing about Shelton, I actually like him as a long-term developmental prospect. I think he could be a quality starter in this league in a couple of years, but he was a raw player coming out of Penn State, and he needs time to grow and develop. He's not ready to play meaningful snaps right now, and that's a problem when he's one of your top backup options. So let me ask Cowboys Nation this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how concerned are you about the offensive line depth? 1 being you're not worried at all, you think they'll figure it out, and 10 being you're losing sleep over this and think it could derail the entire season. Drop your number in the comments because I need to know if I'm overreacting here or if other people are seeing the same red flags that I am. Now let's talk about the secondary for a minute because there was a really interesting development that I haven't seen enough people talking about. Freddie Stewart looked better than Derion Kendrick, significantly better. Now I know it's a small sample size and we have to be careful about overreacting to one preseason game, but the difference in performance was noticeable enough that it needs to be addressed. Stewart did some really impressive things out there, particularly in run support. He had 3 tackles and just 10 total snaps, which is a phenomenal rate of production. He was mostly lining up in the nickel role, and he looked comfortable and instinctive in that spot. He was flying around, making plays, showing the kind of physicality that this defense needs. Derion Kendrick, on the other hand, was not nearly as effective. He only had 1 tackle and was not good in run support. He got picked on when he was in coverage, being targeted twice and allowing both receptions. There was also another target where the throw wasn't very good, but if it had been on target, it could have been a big chunk play, given how much space Kendrick was giving up. He also missed a tackle, according to some analysts, although Next Gen Stats somehow credited him with 0 missed tackles. But I watched that film and I saw Jalen Milroe make Curtis Robinson miss for a first down, and there were definitely other missed tackles throughout that game. The tackling was better than it has been in previous years, I'll give them that, but let's not pretend it was perfect. Neither Stewart nor Kendrick is a guaranteed roster lock at this point, but if I'm the coaching staff, I'm giving Freddie Stewart a lot more snaps in the second preseason game to see what he can really do. He showed enough in limited action that he deserves an extended audition, and I want to see if he can build on that performance or if it was just a flash in the pan. Let's talk about Caleb Downs for a second because his usage in this game was fascinating and might give us a preview of how the Cowboys plan to deploy him during the regular season. Downs played 7 total snaps on defense, and 6 of those were at safety with just 1 at nickel. Now before people start freaking out and saying, oh no, they're not using him at nickel, they're wasting his talent, let me explain the context. The Cowboys were in base defense constantly early in that game. They were running a lot of 5-man fronts to start things off, which meant they had their traditional safeties on the field. But when they shifted into nickel packages, that's when Caleb Downs moved into the nickel spot. And honestly, I hope that's exactly the way they use him in real games. Here's what I think the ideal deployment looks like. When the Cowboys are in base defense against heavy personnel, don't you dare take Caleb Downs off the field. He should be out there as a safety, using his range and instincts to patrol the deep part of the field. But take Muka Harper off the field in those situations if you need to make room. Then, when the Cowboys go into nickel packages against 3 wide receiver sets, that's when you move Downs down into the nickel role, where he can use his coverage skills and playmaking ability in space. This gives you the best of both worlds and keeps your most talented defensive back on the field, regardless of the defensive package. I actually have some really fun ideas about dime package concepts that the Cowboys could run with Caleb Downs as well, but I'm going to save that for a future video. If you want to see that breakdown, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because we've got some creative defensive scheme content coming your way soon. Now let's address the edge rusher situation, because there's a competition brewing that's going to have major implications for the 53-man roster. With Von Miller now in the building, there is clearly room for at most one of Sam Williams and Marius Leafall, barring injuries. I would honestly be surprised if the Cowboys kept both of them at this point. There's a narrow path where maybe they both make it, I guess, but it's more likely that one of these guys is going to be on the outside looking in when final cuts come around. And after watching the preseason game, I have some strong opinions about who should win that competition. I was unimpressed by both Sam Williams and Marius Leafall, if I'm being completely honest. Sam Williams played 16 snaps, which is actually a lot for this game, considering how the Cowboys were managing playing time. Anyone who's going to be a key contributor this season played less than 10 snaps. They sat all the important players early to avoid injury risk. So the fact that Williams played 16 snaps tells you he's in a roster battle and needs to prove himself. But out of those 16 snaps, only 4 were actual pass rush opportunities, and he didn't make any impact on those. He didn't generate pressure, didn't collapse the pocket, didn't show the kind of burst and bend that you need to see from an edge rusher. And beyond the pass rush, I don't think Williams or Leafall did a particularly great job of setting the edge in the run game either. Leafall did have one really nice splash play where he made a great run support tackle for loss inside the red zone. That was an excellent rep and exactly the kind of play he needed to make. But he also got washed out and pushed around on several other reps during his 22 snaps. If you're getting physically dominated by backup offensive linemen in the preseason, that's not a good sign for what's going to happen when you face starting tackles in the regular season. And here's the thing that I think is going to be controversial, but I'm just going to say it. If you watch Sam Williams, Marius Leafall, and James Houston, and you're asking me who's the better edge rusher right now, the answer is James Houston. He just is. Houston had a sack in this game, and yes, one of his pressures got called back for a holding penalty that actually benefited the Cowboys from a yardage perspective. But the point is that he was consistently getting into the backfield and making plays. He was more explosive off the edge than Williams. He showed better pass rush moves than Leafall. If you're asking me straight up who gives you the best chance to actually get after the quarterback, it's Houston. Now, is Sam Williams a better run support player than Houston? Maybe, when Williams actually does his assignment correctly, which seems to happen about half the time. Is Marius Leafall a better special teams player than Houston? Sure, probably. Although the special teams weren't exactly great last year, so I'm not sure how much weight that should carry. But when it comes to the core function of being an edge rusher, which is getting after the quarterback and disrupting the passing game, I think James Houston is the guy right now. And with Von Miller now in the fold providing that veteran presence and proven production, I lean toward keeping Houston over the other two. Which brings me to the bigger question that I want to pose to Cowboys Nation. With Von Miller now on the roster, is this pass rush good enough? I'm not asking if it's elite. I'm not asking if it's perfect. I'm not asking if it's the best in the league. What I'm asking is whether it's good enough for what this team needs to accomplish their goals this season. You've got Micah Parsons, who's a generational talent and one of the most disruptive defensive players in the entire NFL. You've got DeMarcus Lawrence, who's still a really solid player when healthy. Now you add Von Miller into that mix, and suddenly you've got 3 proven commodities who can get after the quarterback. Behind them, you've got some younger guys like Chauncey Golston and whoever wins the competition between Williams, Leafall, and Houston. Is that group good enough to generate consistent pressure, get home on third downs, and make life miserable for opposing quarterbacks? Drop a G in the comments if you think it's good enough for what the Cowboys need this year. Drop an M if you think they actually need more, and this still isn't sufficient to make a deep playoff run. Before we wrap up, I want to touch on some special teams observations, because these small details often end up mattering way more than people realize when you're trying to make final roster decisions. I went back and watched through the special teams snaps specifically to see who was getting opportunities in key roles. On punt coverage, which is one of the most important special teams units, PJ Lockett was out there as the personal protector on the first punt. That's a significant role and shows that the coaches trust him in that spot. On the other 2 punts, Malik Davis was the personal protector, which I think is important as we fill out the back end of the 53-man roster, because special teams value often determines who makes it and who doesn't. For gunner work, which is absolutely critical for flipping field position and making plays on punt coverage, it started with Elijah Clark and Anthony Smith on the outside. The next rep featured Jaden Blue and Jonathan Mingo as the gunners. The final rep had Camden Brown and Amir Speed. Small sample size, obviously, but there were some things worth noting. There was a missed tackle in the middle of the field that led to a big chunk play on a punt return. But I'm not going to blame Blue or Mingo for that one, because they were doing their job getting down the field. What I will say is that I thought Amir Speed had the best rep of any of the gunners because he got down the field the fastest, beat his guy cleanly, and helped force a fair catch. That's exactly what you want to see from a gunner. He showed speed, he showed urgency, and he showed the ability to win his matchup and make a play. Make note of those names because a couple of those guys getting gunner reps are absolutely fighting for roster spots right now, and their performance on special teams might be the difference between making the team and getting cut. And speaking of special teams, here's one more note that I think is significant. Phil Mafua played exactly 1 special teams snap total. 1 snap. That's not good for him at all. If you're a bubble player and you're only seeing the field for 1 special teams snap in a preseason game where the coaches are evaluating depth, that tells you that you're probably not high on their list of priorities. Mafua is going to need to show a lot more in the next preseason game if he wants to have any chance of making this roster. So where does all of this leave us, Cowboys Nation? We've got Von Miller joining a defense that desperately needed another proven pass rusher. We've got offensive line depth concerns that could become a major problem if injuries hit. We've got young defensive backs like Freddie Stewart making plays and pushing for roster spots. We've got edge rushers fighting for their professional lives to secure one of the final spots on the 53-man roster. And we've got special teams battles playing out that will determine who's flying commercial in a few weeks and who's suiting up for the regular season opener. This is the most critical time of the year for so many players, and every single snap in these preseason games matters more than fans sometimes realize. The Von Miller signing is absolutely a win for this organization. Getting a future Hall of Famer for 1 year and $5.5 million with manageable incentives is fantastic business. The leadership he brings, the knowledge he can share with younger players, and the production he can still provide on the field make this a low-risk, high-reward move that could genuinely help push this team toward a championship. But there are still questions that need to be answered. The offensive line depth has to improve, the secondary competition has to play out, the edge rusher battle has to be decided, and the special teams units have to show they can be reliable and not a liability like they've been at times in recent years. We're going to be covering all of this and more right here on the channel, so make sure you're subscribed and have those notifications turned on. We're bringing you daily Dallas Cowboys content, breaking down every roster move, every practice report, every preseason game, and every development as we march toward the regular season. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. How do you feel about the Von Miller signing? Are you concerned about the offensive line? Who do you want to see make the roster in these final competitions? Let's get a conversation going, because Cowboys Nation is the best fan base in sports, and I want to hear from all of you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.